Meccano part number M189, flexible plate, from the 1939 Mechanised Army Constructor set. Hi folks and welcome back. Britain is a green and pleasant land, a holy sceptre, and a beacon of freedom in the darkness of the night. A country that in less than a day's travel can take you from the bright city lights of London to the rural peace of villages, of a type that you only see on vintage Christmas cards, to the upland fells and wild mountains. It is a country defined by its diversity and seemingly politeness to all people. It is a country forged over millenniums that has embraced the invading forces and instead of fighting against them has absorbed their culture into the collective mass that is Britain. And while I'm sat here writing this opening on a beautiful July summer's day, I'm filled with a love of this nation, a quiet appreciation for its beauty. And to be honest, I'm spending more time watching the blue tits that have a nest in the forsythia bush in the corner of the garden than I am writing the script. They appear at top speed out of the cover of the lilac tree, covering the open space between the tree and the side of the house, and alight on the bird feeder that I have just outside the window, grab a mouthful of food and rush back to the nest. Each mission takes around 30 seconds, and the aerial battles that are happening with another pair of nesting blue tits further down the garden is interesting to watch. But transportation, our ability to move from A to B, is a freedom that we have not had for long. In Britain, the first glimpses of that freedom to go any distance was the railway. But you were limited to where the station was, and in some cases that could be quite a journey just to get to a halt. Locally in the Derwent Valley and higher up towards Edmundbyres and Blanchland, the stagecoach ran until the early 20th century, making an important connection between the villages and the larger towns of Hexham and Consett. It was a day's journey to get to market, a journey that would start very early and see you come back very late in the day. And it would take the heat of the furnace of war to give us our public transport network and the freedoms that we have and enjoy today. Mass public transport can be broken into three stages: pre-World War I, post-World War I, and post-World War II. The idyllic Victorian early 1900s, when the British Empire ruled the world, well, nearly 25% of it, was to change in the aftermath of the First World War, as the British social classes reformed how the country operated. No longer was the divide between the classes so great. The death toll on the nation had removed so large a section of the nation's populace in one fatal moment in history. The revolution in Russia also sent out its warning note to the rest of the world. Late in the war, the need to create the Ministry of Transport to organise shipping and railways to help rebuild the empire post-war was envisaged. Little did the government realise that the empire was already fractured. The war had been almost the last sounding of the trumpet. So much had been given by so many for a conflict between nations that wanted to rule all, but seemingly gave so little back. But one thing was to come out of the war to end all wars: the readable supply and construction of the internal combustion engine. And the mass growth post-war of intercity bus routes is to be seen. And with it was an unforeseen benefit. As bus routes extended to villages like Edmundbyres, high on the edge of the fells of County Durham, the day-long journey to get to the larger towns for shopping was cut down to less than half a day. And with this sense of connection came freedoms for women, so often restricted by the length of time the journey took, or remotenesses of houses from rail networks. It allowed children to attend better education and adults to attend colleges and night classes. It also led to the ability of people to get better paid jobs in cities while living in more rural areas. And as the intercity bus competed with the rail network, the former began to show its strength in its flexibility and adaptability over the latter. After all, a bus route can be changed, moved, with additional services added or removed if not needed, some of which is harder for a railway to do. This was the death toll for many of our branch lines in Britain, as the railways could not compete on the same cost level as the bus companies, leading in time to the infamous beaching cuts of the 1960s. At the same time in America, the need for mass transport for workers began to become apparent. One of the earliest people to see this was a 27-year-old Swedish immigrant, Eric Wickman. Born in Martersgarten as Eric Wirtman, he changed his name in 1905 when he travelled to America and ended up working in Hibbing, Minnesota, as a car salesman for Hupmobile in 1914. After receiving his first 7-seat model for Hupmobile, which he couldn't sell, he decided to offer a bus service for miners from Hibbing to Alice for 15 cents a ride. He made $2.25 on his first run. In 1918, he joined forces with another company and created the Masiba Transport Company with an annual income of $40,000. Wickman, along with another of his friends that had set up the first company, sold up in 1922 and formed a new company, Northland. They operated buses between big cities, giving a better service than the local railroads, for many of the same reasons that we see in Britain at the time. The flexibility of the internal combustion engine to go just about anywhere compared to that of the railways. The expansion of the 1920s saw a new element being added to the company, that of sightseeing, a road trip for no other reason than a trip. You want to go see the Grand Canyon? Then do it aboard a bus. The annual turnover for the company by this point was over $6 million a year, a far cry from the $2.25 he made on that first run only 16 years before. In 1930, they wanted to rebrand the company, as the current branding, Motor Transport Corporation, didn't quite have the ring they wanted for it. One of the drivers, seeing the reflection of his bus in a window of a passing building, seemingly to leap forward, was inspired. Greyhound was to become the name that is now synonymous with cheap interstate travel. By 1934, the Greyhound Corporation, as the company was called, or just Greyhound coaches as they were known by to the public, had surpassed many of the Class 1 railroads, transporting around 400 million passengers annually. 1935 would see that number increase to over 650 million passengers, with profits for the company of over $8 million after running costs for the business had been accounted for. It wouldn't be until post-World War II that a new rival would enter into the sector, that of cheap regular air transport routes, as reliable aircraft became available on the market post-conflict, along with a huge surge in qualified pilots, with lots of flying hours under their belt. In Britain, it was to be nearly 30 years before we would have the same level of freedom of transport that America enjoyed. The aftermath of the Second World War left Britain in major problems, not just social and economic, but that of failing infrastructure, and even today, some nearly 80 years on from the end of the war, Britain's infrastructure is at breaking point. In 1968, with the newly formed Transport Act, bus companies were placed under the control of the government, with the National Bus Company to act as a holding company for the long list of state-owned local bus companies. And while many family-owned companies would still exist, the larger companies were owned and operated by the central government. One such company to appear in this stew pot of public transport would be the Intercity and Inter-Regional Bus Company, National. Later in 1974, it was rebranded as the National Express. Beloved by many a student trying to get home, and made famous in the film Billy Elliot, where Billy is leaving home to go to the Royal Ballet School. He leaves from the now long vanished St James's coach station to a farewell two-fingered salute from his brother. The coach in British society will also forever be linked to cheap holidays in Spain and Portugal, as a more economical method of travel to those countries compared to air travel. But as the car gained more hold with the British household in the late 1960s, and with the freedom of transport that it brought, the use of the observation coach dropped off, not just here, but in America as well. But the cheaper intercity and interregional coaches will be here to stay. After all, Megacoach, a rival of National Express, is a fraction of cost of rail transport and air transport in Britain, and around half the cost of National Express. After all, it costs less to use a coach than you will spend in fuel. And what you might waste in time, you save economically and reduce the impact of your journey on your mental and emotional self by reducing your stress. I do wonder what the stress of the Blue Tits are, though, as this is their second brood for this year, and both Mum and Dad are beginning to look a bit frazzled around the edges now. And soon I won't be interacting with them by putting food out as I move away from here. Or the house sparrows that have a nest in a broken brick on the back of the house, and have been doing so for all my life, with a lifespan on average of 13 years. That makes it a generational nesting space.